Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crimecast. Jamie and John here with a Christmas Eve edition of True Crimecast. Although, John, this case doesn't have anything to do with Christmas.
No, it doesn't. But it's a really fascinating case, and I'm really glad to cover it today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into the details of those. Just wanted to tell everybody, hope you have a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, all that, John, and to give a little bit of thanks.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to some folks who came in over on Patreon recently. We have Tammy and Jason. So thank you, Tammy and Jason. We appreciate you guys coming in. Tammy came in at the $25 a month level, which is incredible. So thank you, Tammy. Jason came in at the $3 a month level.
A week from tomorrow, you're going to get that bonus episode. So keep an eye out for that. John, it's going to be a busy couple weeks. A lot of people traveling for the holidays. And the best way for me to stay on top of everything I have to get done is Magic Mind, which is something I use every day. They worked with us for a long time. It's a product that is a mental performance shot that you take every day. It's just a little bottle of juice, and it tastes great, and it helps me feel energetic without being shaky. It helps me feel awake without the insomnia. It's like all of the positives that you get from other supplements, but really haven't found a drawback yet.
No, it's incredible. It helps me to have energy all day, but not have the crash. You know,
Yeah.
I've had energy drinks in the past, and they feel great while they are working, but then you hit the slump.
You don't hit that with Magic Mind. And our listeners can take advantage of a special deal to get 20% off your order at Magic Mind. Go to magicmind.com/VIPJNJ20 and use code VIPJNJ20 at checkout. Again, that's magicmind.com/VIPJNJ20 to get 20% off your Magic Mind order, and you will not regret it.
All right, Jamie, we have a case that reminds me of a TV show I used to like, and that was Dexter.
Yeah, this guy's referred to often as the Dexter Killer. And, you know, they just not brought back, but they just started putting out a Dexter prequel show.
Okay.
Dexter, when he's a teenager and just starting to get into his kills. If you're not familiar, Dexter is a character in a show that was on, I think it was on CBS and then went to Showtime. Anyway, it's on Netflix now. But it's a guy who had the desire to kill, and his dad was a cop, and his dad guided him to use that to kill killers.
Okay.
And this person got really fascinated with that show and with the creative ways that Dexter got his victims and dismembered them and got rid of the bodies, and decided he wanted to put that into real life. So we're going to go today to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. This story, I mean, there's some graphic pieces, but that's not the story. The story is the deception, the horror, the fear put into the victims, and really just that this ties everything that we like about true crime together. There's a puzzle, there's a suspect, there's hidden evidence, there's a witness who doesn't know they're a witness, like so many interesting pieces of this case. But I don't want to forget our primary target of this, and that is Johnny Altinger, who ultimately lost his life to this killer. Let's talk a little bit about Johnny. He was born in 1970, and he had a fairly normal life. He loved motorbikes. He worked as an oil field equipment manufacturer. In 2008, when Altinger was 38 years old, he decided that he wanted to increase his presence in the online dating scene. John, I saw a chart recently that blew my mind, showing the number of couples that are together that met online. That's where most people, not a lot of people, not some people, most people are meeting their partners now.
That's really funny because I saw the same thing, and It was on an episode of Good Mythical Morning. And I wondered if that was legit because like behind that was like bars, friends, restaurants, church. And I thought the highest number of matches would be like through friends, through mutual friends, but no, online dating.
By a significant margin. And
it's not just where people meet, but like how they ended up married.
Right. Yeah. That's how people find each other now, which is fascinating. And for reasons we're going to talk about today, gives reason for pause.
Sorry if you feel like you're talking to your two papaws about meeting people online, but I was married before online dating.
Yeah.
Well, before online dating was
in the early days of online dating. It was just starting out, and there were certainly websites you could go to, but at the time it had a negative connotation, and now I really don't think it does. I think it's common.
Pretty sure I was married before there was Facebook. That's how long I've been married.
It was pretty close. So he had this date. One night he told his friends he was going out on a date with somebody he had met on a popular dating site at the time called Plenty of Fish.
Plenty of Fish in the Sea. I get it.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a catchy name. It's a good title.
That doesn't age well with like catfishing nowadays though.
Yeah. So that's where we're going actually. So maybe it does fit well, but he didn't come back. And within a few days, his friends and family started to worry about him, and they would eventually contact police and discover that he was missing, and they would get on a trail to find out what happened to him.
Of course, after police they weren't immediately helpful. Like one of his friends had to call a few times because at first the police were like, dude, he's almost a 30-year-old dude. Like let him go out and enjoy this. He's chasing some women. Let him have his fun.
He had sent out some emails saying that he was going to go away for a while, but it didn't sound like him. Like the whole thing was sus, as the kids would say. But yeah, you're right. It takes a while to get the police on board with this.
But when they do finally realize, all right, we got to look into this, they start noticing a lot of things. Detective Bill Clark was the lead on the case, and he was determined to find out what happened to Johnny. Since his loved ones knew that he was supposedly on a date, the detective did the logical. He started retracing the steps, and Clark went immediately to the website, Plenty of Fish. However, the profile for the person that Johnny was supposed to meet, whose name was Jen, quote unquote, was taken down. It was no longer on the site. So then he decided to check Johnny's email, and that provided more useful information. In fact, while doing so, they found the address for Jen. So Detective Clark took some backup, and they went to this address.
Seems like a pretty logical investigation so far. You're tracking back, getting the address, and surely you're going to find something here. And what they found was that this was kind of an old place, and it was owned by a man named Mark Twitchell, who's going to be a main character in this story as well. Twitchell was born on July 4th, 1979. We don't know a lot about his early life. We do know that he went on to graduate from the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, NAIT, as we all know it. He had a degree in radio and television arts, and he wanted to make movies. That was his dream. In 1997, John, he was able to make a Star Wars fan film, and he was able to get the guy that played Boba Fett, Jeremy Bulloch, to be in the movie. That is super cool, isn't it?
That's wild. That's crazy.
At the address where he was found, Twitchell was actually filming a short film that was going to be a horror movie. He claimed that he had never seen Altinger, but he seemed willing to cooperate, was open to talking to police and letting them look around.
So over time and over the course of several interviews, Twitchell stated different things, and he started to contradict himself. At first, he said that he had never seen Johnny or his car. But then he mentioned that I forgot to tell you, I actually bought a car from a guy, and the car matches the description of the car you're talking about from Johnny. And he said that he met a stranger at a gas station and said, I'm going away. I'm not going to need my car anymore. You should buy this car. And he said that he paid $40 for this car.
$40, a running automobile.
I'm looking for a car right now. If any of you have one that runs for $40, hit your boy
That's
up.
the thing. You don't have one that runs for 40. So this is a red flag. Should have been for Twitchell if he's telling the truth here. But if not, this is a red flag for police to say this isn't sounding like a believable story.
We could come back to this, but like, obviously it's a lie, or you assume it's a lie. But like, if it is a lie, make up a more believable number, because the story in and of itself is crazy, but then the number makes it almost absurd.
It does. It does. Yeah. I mean, throw 100 in there and somebody might believe it.
Yeah. So Detective Clark was very skeptical of Twitchell, but he was able to search the movie studio. Now, this is where he was supposedly making a movie, and it was supposed to be like a horror film.
Like very bloody. And I think Clark was there actually to watch some of the filming, and it was just very graphic. And I don't know, it was a pretty unbelievable scenario, apparently.
He told the detective how he made the fake blood. He said that he used like corn syrup with food coloring, and they found a receipt for all kinds of like commercial cleaners and stuff. And he was like, yeah, you got to clean this stuff up right away, or it really could be an ant problem.
Tracks.
So, but I think it's wild that Twitchell gave access to this studio. They didn't have a warrant at this time, but it was like, yeah, come on in, check it out. Search whatever you want to search for.
Yeah. And it was obvious that while he was talking, he was letting him come around, that he knew more about Johnny, how he had allegedly sold him this car, and maybe where he went after. Clark started looking for other reports in the area around Twitchell's studio, and he found a report that came from a couple months earlier that was called in about a disturbance while people were walking their dog around the neighborhood. Again, this is the same neighborhood where the email from Jen had led them to look for Johnny Altinger. There was a couple, their names were Trevor and Marissa, and they had called the police to report that they were out walking their dog, and a man had run up to them, falling on his face in front of them, begging for help, saying, "He's attacking me. Please help me. Please help me." John, how do you respond to that if you go walking in our neighborhood and that happens?
Well, I'm calling the police and asking for an ambulance.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of options, but I think they froze. I mean, you may freeze for a second, but I think you're going to do something. But this certainly was shocking to Trevor and Marissa.
So shortly after he arrived, a man wearing a black hockey mask came around the corner as if he had been chasing that man that fell at their feet. So the man in the mask tried to play it off as if he was playing like a game with the man. So then he turned and ran away. Then all of a sudden, the other man ran away as well. And Trevor and Marissa filed a report, but they had no clue who the other man was. So Bill Clark put out a call in the area to find a man that had been attacked. And they basically wanted to just bring this man in and talk about what had happened and who was the person in the black mask. A man called pretty quickly and said that he thought that it could be an employee of his who around that time had come to work beat up. And sure enough, that man gave Clark a call the very next day.
Yeah, this guy didn't call the police himself to report this. The guy who had been attacked, he had kind of, whether it was by, feeling shame or embarrassment about it, didn't report it to anybody.
And I think we'll go into why he would feel shame and embarrassment later on. So just hang on to that.
Yeah, we'll get there pretty soon. But his boss called in and said, "Hey, I think this may have been my employee." And they waited on the employee to call because they didn't want to just grab him at work. And shockingly, he called the next day. It's really, I think Bill Clark was doing a really good job once he got involved in this investigation. And this was a big break for them. It turns out the man's name was Gilles Tetreault. And as it turned out, he had also been looking for a connection through online dating. Now, Gilles didn't know it at the time, but the woman he had connected with, who called herself Sheena, was simply a lure, a catfish, a trap set by somebody who had different plans in mind for Gilles.
So I should point out, and I don't know that we hit it already, but when the police were going to this address that they had to look for Jen, there was nobody named Jen that lived there. And
Excellent
then they talked to neighbors, and neighbors had no idea who this was. So it actually, the address had a home and a detached garage, and they were both rented, and they were rented to two different people, neither of which were named Jen.
Right. Yeah.
So just want to make sure that we clear that up.
No Jen, and I think we'll find out there was also no Sheena.
Yeah, it's really unsettling to hear about someone using an online dating site as a hunting ground, but that is what we have, and it terrifies the father in me to know that most people are finding their significant others online, and I have children who will be in the dating world hopefully in the next 25 years or so.
I love that time frame for your kids.
That would put them at like 40.
Yes. There'll be a whole, like, we'll just date people virtually or through AR or something.
So this guy, Gilles, thought that he was meeting someone interested in dating him, but in reality, he was being led into a freaking nightmare. After they exchanged messages with each other, again, Gilles and this girl, is it Sheena?
Sheena, yeah.
So he was invited to meet up with her for dinner and a movie. But when he arrived at her place, there was some unusual instructions that were given. She told him to enter through the garage. The garage door would be left open for him, and she said that he'd find her apartment through the back entrance. That's I don't know. I don't know how many red flags you have to see in a text before you're like, you know what? I actually don't want to meet you anymore, Sheena.
Yeah, I don't know either. Is somebody, if you're going on a blind date and you're going to pick somebody up, I don't think it's I'll text you when I get there and you come out to me. I think it's a pick them up at the door situation. So you want to do that. I live in the apartment out back, come through the garage. Like, I think I could talk myself into believing that's okay. In retrospect, it looks scary.
We're guys, and I don't know, depending on what he had in his mind, you're probably pretty much willing to walk through any weird situation to get to your goal, right?
You often are, unfortunately, and Gilles was willing to overlook red flags that came up already. But we're going to take a break, and when we get back, we'll go into what Gilles actually found at the house and how it would change his life forever. So Gilles had arrived at Sheena's house, and he thought the instructions were odd, but when he got there, he saw that the garage door was kind of ajar, if you will. It was slightly open, just as Sheena had said it would be. So he ducked under the door and entered the dimly lit garage. But before he could knock on any door, he was immediately attacked. Out of nowhere, a man wearing a hockey mask, a black hockey mask at that, lunged at him with a stun baton. So you think of a stun gun. This is one of those sticks that has the electric charge at the end of it that you jab into somebody, and it shocks them. And he started getting shocked immediately before he could react to what was happening.
You could imagine that Gilles was completely disoriented. I mean, he thought he was going there to meet a nice, attractive young woman, and now he's been hit with a stun baton and is physically attacked by a man.
Yeah, nothing could have caught him more off guard at this point, I think.
He thought he was showing up for a date, and he suddenly found himself fighting for his life. So his attacker, who we now know was Mark Twitchell, had used a series of moves that seemed straight out of a horror movie, and Twitchell ordered Gilles to lie face down, close his eyes, and put his hands behind his back. And after he had been violently attacked and given these orders, he didn't know what else to do, so he complied at first. But then he realized that this is a fight for my life situation, so he decided to fight back.
Yeah, and it did take him a minute to gather himself, and there's a matter of, am I going to survive if I comply? Do I have a better job of survival if I fight? And Gilles decided to fight. He tore off the duct tape that Twitchell had placed over his eyes, and he started to resist. He'd already been shocked a few times and was a bit weakened by that, but the adrenaline kicked in enough for him to grab the gun that Twitchell was holding, and to his surprise, it was a fake gun. So he had an actual stun baton, but the firearm that he was threatening Gilles with was not real. And understanding that the gun wasn't real and in his life that he wasn't going to be shot if he ran away gave him the strength he needed to push the gun aside and to get free from Twitchell's grip. He broke away and run out of the garage, escaping into the night.
Now, Twitchell didn't seem to pursue him very aggressively, and I guess in his mind, he thought that Gilles would not report this attack. And he would be right. Gilles was traumatized and embarrassed and decided to keep quiet. And I guess we should say the reason that Gilles felt embarrassed was because he was a married man. And this was going to be like an extramarital affair. So he didn't want news to get out because that would mean his current wife would find out.
Yeah, that's certainly not the publicity that he wanted at this time. And he was hurt. He was beat up pretty bad. That's how his boss noticed it when he got to work that day. But it was enough for him to explain that away to his wife and to keep the pain down inside.
I'm really thankful that when the call went out to potentially find, connections to this guy, that his boss thought of him, and then he was able to push all the embarrassment and potential problems this was going to cause in his marriage aside and get this guy off the streets.
And if his boss hadn't called or if Gilles hadn't cooperated, he wanted to keep it under wraps. Who's to tell who else would have been hurt or even killed? But this is where Clark really started putting this picture together. He searched through Twitchell's studio and his house. And when he went to search his house, his wife left him. So it was already starting to shake up Twitchell's livelihood and his life. And it got worse when he got some files off of his computer.
Yeah, you mentioned that Twitchell's wife filed for divorce. We should also mention, yes, Mark Twitchell had a wife and a young child.
Yeah. And he's out here, at least for Gilles, we know, was pretending to be a woman meeting him on a dating website. But this file they found on the computer really was what cracked the entire case wide open. It was labeled the SK Confessions, and it read as if it had been a script for a horror movie. SK meaning serial killer confessions. However, one of the stories in that document was almost an exact retelling of the Gilles Tetreault attack from the point of view of the attacker, given the flaws that happened, given how he got away, how the attack started, how he lured him in, was almost word for word what happened to Gilles.
So this was written as if it was a movie script, but it was basically a confession letter.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's like if I just went out to lunch with my wife. So if I wrote a short story about going out to lunch with your wife.
Man, I really thought you were going to talk about murder in the same sentence. So I was like, what?
No, if I could write a story about going to lunch with your wife, but it's just what I did.
Your wife.
My wife.
Okay.
My wife.
So perhaps the most...
She paid.
Fair enough. Perhaps the most important part of the SK Confessions was what they found in another story. And if Clark was right, and this was in fact a confession letter and / movie script, then it also went into detail of what happened to Johnny. It was a story of getting a man to come into the garage through a dating site, killing this man, and then dismembering him, and then eventually disposing his body into a sewer drain. And while the details became more and more disturbing, that's when Clark really thought the truth was finally coming to light about what happened to Johnny.
It's important to note that this isn't something that Twitchell was keeping to himself, in that he had some folks that he emailed back and forth with and he chatted with online, sharing script ideas. He found other people that loved Dexter and said, let's come up with a story about a killer and the interesting ways he can kill people. So those people thought they were having creative, artistic conversations about storytelling. And here Twitchell is putting these things into practice. And Altinger's situation was very similar to what Gilles went through. Johnny had also met Jen on Plenty of Fish, and he had also been lured to that same garage with the promise of a date. But Altinger wouldn't be so lucky. In the SK Confessions, Twitchell detailed step by step his plans for luring victims and satisfying his twisted impulses. He referred to himself as a master of puppets, viewing his victims as mere objects for this horrific experiment in storytelling through reality.
Could you imagine being Clark and reading something and having the realization, like, this reads like a fiction book, but it is not fiction. And then you're basically reading what happened to Johnny. And it's sick that, I don't know, it would hit me hard reading that. You know?
I have trouble watching horror movies now, knowing that they're fiction. Just it's uncomfortable. So to realize that this happened to somebody, man, it gives you chills.
Well, in this screenplay, if you will, Twitchell outlined his obsession with the TV show Dexter, which is what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode. And then he also detailed his plans to act out the life of a serial killer, and then his experiments with the human capacity for terror. In a sick way, this was coming to fruition. In a weird way, Twitchell was making himself come to life through this script, and it was disgusting.
And the details from this document, which, John, listening to the story and reading about how they found this, sounds like he had thought he deleted all of these documents, but you can't really delete anything. The documents, the information is going to be in there, and they were able to get these out over time. They didn't get this all at once. So the details came out over a span of time, and they were so accurate as to what they ended up confirming later. He wrote about creating a kill room, which in Dexter, he always puts plastic everywhere to clean up after himself. Twitchell talked about the knives and tools that he would use for dismembering the body. When investigators finally gained access to Twitchell's garage, they found traces of Johnny Altinger's blood and signs of a cleanup attempt with the cleaning materials you mentioned earlier, John. Police pieced together that after attacking Johnny, Twitchell tried to dispose of the evidence by dismembering him. He attempted to burn his remains before disposing of the remainder of them in a storm drain.
Isn't this is just sick, bro?
It is. And again, this could be an episode of Dexter, assuming it lined up with the story, but these are the kinds of things he did.
The most horrifying detail here is that Twitchell used his cinematic skills to create a scenario straight out of a horror film, and he even filmed portions of his activities, though he thought he would delete the files in an attempt to erase the digital footprint, but forensic experts were able to retrieve those critical pieces of evidence. While awaiting trial, Twitchell provided a map to help Clark find Johnny. And yeah, they listed the specific sewer drain, and police were looking in all kinds of drains. They just always came up empty. So this was a map to help them out. And when I heard that they had this drawing now, I was like, are they going to offer this guy some kind of plea deal in exchange for help? But I don't think that's what happened. I think this guy just wanted to have the body found so he could almost get recognized for it in a weird way.
Right. And that was part of another game, was drawing that map, because it took them a while, and actually they had to go back to him later to get more clarification. During the trial, prosecutors presented the SK confessions as central evidence, saying that this was a confession. This document showed Twitchell's obsession with creating the ultimate quote-unquote movie plot while using real people as his actors and his victims. It was as if he viewed human life as disposable and part of his artistic expression, and believed everybody around him could not keep up with his intellect enough to catch him. He was trying to create, as he said, a completely new medium of entertainment through realistic horror.
It was the testimony of Gilles and others that were wrapped up in this awful scenario that helped drive home the terror that Twitchell inflicted. When Gilles testified, he described the nightmare that he had been through in that garage. His words made it very clear that if he had not fought back, he would likely have been murdered as well. And it's clear that Gilles' survival was an exception rather than Twitchell's plan. Twitchell had detailed how he'd initially gotten Gilles with the intent of killing him and got him into that garage, but because of Gilles' escape, Twitchell had to regroup, and he was able to adapt his methods, and soon after, that's when Johnny became the next target.
So he learned from his mistakes and got better at luring people to kill them. After Gilles' testimony and the introduction of the SK confessions as evidence, it became undeniable that Twitchell was attempting to replicate a Dexter-like fantasy. His meticulous planning, the chilling preparation, and the ease with which he seemed able to dehumanize his victims shows just how disturbed he was. He didn't view his actions as murder. He saw them as indulging in a fantasy.
Twitchell's defense argued that the SK Confessions was simply fiction. It was a screenplay that he'd been working on for a film project, but the physical evidence and his online conversations with his victims completely contradicted that. The chilling reality was that Twitchell had blurred the lines between fiction and reality, and by the end of the trial, it was apparent that Twitchell's fantasies had overtaken his sense of reality.
Ultimately, Twitchell was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. That's the Canadian standard that we've often spoken about, that there is no sentence in Canada that will not allow you to apply for parole or be eligible for parole after 25 years. He's going to be eligible in the year 2033. So while he was caught and prevented from hurting other people, that horror still lingers to this day. People still wonder how somebody could become so entrenched in a fantasy that they go to such extremes to make it real. And are there other people like him out there? Spoiler alert, there are, but people in this community certainly know that this can be a reality.
And there are victims who survived, and they are going to be impacted by this encounter for the rest of their lives. They went through something horrific, but I step back and I think about this case, and I'm just so glad that they stepped forward and shared their stories, even though it might paint them in a negative light for what their intentions were going into the garage. But having this guy off the streets and knowing what happened to Johnny, totally worth it. And I appreciate them stepping out and doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously this is a cautionary tale to be careful when you're dating online. Be careful when you're meeting up with anybody, when you're interacting with people who are not in front of your face, and even with people that are. You don't know who you can trust. Twitchell certainly was sick. He ended up taking the stand in his own defense and talking about everything he did. He actually wanted to plead guilty to disturbing a corpse, but not to murder. So it was a very weird way for him to kind of claim and take pride in his murders without also accepting responsibility. But he is behind bars, so at least nobody on the outside could be victimized by him anymore. He's eligible for parole in about 8.5 years. So that will be coming up, John. I would love to go back. Something you and I haven't done is study the number of murderers in Canada that are paroled after that 25-year mark. Do most of them end up spending the rest of their lives in prison? I need to go look at some statistics there because I really struggle with this sentence. This guy is obviously sick, and I have no doubt that if he's able when he gets out, he's going to look for ways to make this happen again.
Yeah, this is a crazy case, and I wonder, like, was the only murder victim Johnny, or were there other people in the confession letters, or were there other letters that he was able to destroy that we'll never get back? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think your digital footprint. I mean, I feel like experts are able to find most everything, but who knows? Maybe there was another computer that we don't know about that got flushed down a sewer drain too. I mean,
yeah.
Who knows?
No, you're not wrong. There certainly could be other victims. Hopefully there are not, but if not for Gilles Tetreault, then he still could be out there killing. So thankful that he was turned in, thankful for those brave voices who stepped up. Thankful to Trevor and Marissa for calling police. Everybody who left that breadcrumb, for Jill's boss calling the police. to tell him it may have been him that led to potentially saving lives here. As meticulous as he was, it turns out, John, that him documenting his experience is what brought him down. So I think that's kind of odd. Like, you're going to think out every detail and write it down, except getting rid of what you wrote down.
Yeah. But this guy, like, he wants to play this very smart character, but for a smart character, he's doing some dumb stuff in his real life. Like, if you are ever going to murder someone and want to get away with it, don't record it. Don't write down your thoughts. Just be completely stoic.
Or don't do it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that's plan A is don't, but if you're going to.
So I heard about the story. Dateline did a lot of interviews with people involved, including Gilles and Detective Clark, and they put it into a series called Man in the Black Mask, and with Keith Morrison doing the voice. So if you love that guy's voice, this is a great story. But to hear the voices of these individuals, that's a great place to get that. But fascinating story that includes catfishing, deception, murder, and then heroic survivors that help to prevent more violence. So this is the total package of a crime story, I think, John.
Sure is. Jamie, thanks for bringing this one to us. This was wild for sure.
All right. Well, guys, we appreciate you hanging out with us. Like I said, this is Christmas Eve. We will have more content throughout this week and next. We don't take too many breaks here on True Crimecast, but we hope you have a wonderful Christmas. And then next year we'll talk about heading into the new year and what that means with a new series coming up. I think we're going to have a few episodes on Mr. Vincent McMahon Jr.
Oh my gosh.
It's going to be a good time. I can't wait.
All right, guys, we appreciate you. And until next crime, this has been True Crimecast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.